The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me in the Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday evening, third show in a row. And we're going to take a little bit break for the rest of the week. And again, thank you for being here. I really tried to come up with a positive topic. I tried to think of something we could talk about that would be inspiring, that would be positive, and And the fact is that the news cycle is such that the things I feel like I have to comment on, and the cycle is going to make these things disappear. And none of them are good. None of them are good. So today, I want to focus on one particular story. Let me take these off. I want to focus on one particular story that amazingly, stunningly, but not surprisingly if you understand the media and if you understand the news cycle, and if you understand the American people and what they want to hear and what they're interested in, is getting very, very little press and getting very little attention. Now, granted, I don't watch Fox, I don't watch CNN, MSNBC, I don't watch any of the broadcast news, so maybe, or the cable news, so maybe it's getting more press over there. But, I follow Google News, Apple News, I skim the headlines, I look at the major newspapers, and with few exceptions, this story, while made some headlines yesterday, is given the magnitude of the story, has basically been buried as the press wants to focus on impeachment and wants to focus on the Justice Department and all the to-dos about the FBI and so on. And we're going to get to that later in the show because I think it's all connected. But to me, the most important story of the week, the most important story of the month, maybe the most important story of the year, the most interesting story, the deepest story, the story that has the most implications for our view of government, our view of the world, and that relates to human life. It relates to human death, the real casualties, is the publication, I think it was yesterday, by the Washington Post, of the Afghanistan Papers. Echoing the Pentagon Papers, which were the papers published describing the war in Vietnam in the 1970s. The Afghan Papers were published yesterday by Washington Post. I'll tell you more about them. You probably know very little about them because they've received so little press. But they are crucially important to understanding a war that has lasted, 18 years, 19 years, 18 years, that has taken the lives of 2,400 American young men, and probably some women, that has cost limbs and injury and all kinds of injury and suffering to over 20,000 American troops, not to mention the PTSD and the trauma of a war being fought, has cost the American taxpayers $1 trillion at least, if not more than that. And major papers describing this war, explaining this war, were released yesterday, thousands of documents, thousands of pages, hundreds of documents were released that really shed light like nothing else in the past has on what this war is all about and the failures of the war and the lies that this war has involved. And nobody cares. Now, I have to admit, and maybe this sounds arrogant, but it's true. I have to admit that I haven't read all the papers. There's no way to do that. Somebody's going to have to write a number of dissertations on the number of documents that will be released. I've read some of the summaries. I actually skimmed some of the reports themselves. I did look at some of the people, some of the interviews, and I'll describe what these involve in a minute in more detail. But nothing really that was said there surprised me at all. Indeed. I warned about this in 2002. I warned about this repeatedly in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I gave up in 8. About what was going on in Afghanistan, why it was bound to fail, why it was a disaster, why our troops were dying for naught. Now, finally, I mean, I don't think with the right conclusions, but finally, all the ideas that I articulated those years have come to light through interviews of generals, diplomats, Afghans, Americans, and nobody seems to care. What is the story behind these papers? A few years ago, in where is it? I had the exact year here. Let me find it. Yeah, in 2008, Congress created another government agency. Yeah, we don't have enough of those. And created another government agency, and the purpose of the agency was to investigate how Afghanistan war and the restoration of Afghanistan was going. How $1 trillion spent, how that was succeeding. And what this new agency engaged in is a series of interviews starting in, I think, 2014. Interviews, they spent $11 million on this. The project is called the Lessons Learned Project, where they interviewed everybody engaged with the Afghan war. And, created hundreds of interviews. I think there are 400 interviews plus. And they released some reports of lessons learned, pretty lame, bureaucratic reports with, very little depth and very little controversy. At some point, I guess the Washington Post figured out that Flynn, who was Donald Trump's first national security advisor, had given one of these interviews, and they asked for a Freedom of Information Act to actually get the information, get the interview with Flynn, and they went to court, and they won. They got an interview, but in the process, they discovered, there were another 400 of these interviews. So again, they went to court, and they got all 400 documents. And you can actually read now all 400 documents on the Washington Post website. By the way, just as an aside, this is what journalism looks like. Following up on a lead, getting information, disclosing new information, summarizing it for the reader, putting it out there. I mean, the fact is that without news organizations like the Washington Post, as much as we all love to hate them, we would never find out about these things. Breitbart is not going to do this. Nobody is going to do it other than those evil, horrific, horrible, disgusting mainstream media. As biased as they are, they actually do journalism sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And when they do, they should be complimented. And I have to say, everything I've read so far about the Washington Post's investigation into the Afghan war, into these interviews, has been excellent. They're providing information. They're providing analysis. They're providing facts. They're providing quotes. Now, I'm sure there's bias here. I'm sure that if I read all the interviews, I would glean a lot more out of it than what the Washington Post has presented to me. But the only reason I can even access these interviews is because the Washington Post has done the job to present them. Present them as is. You get General Petraeus, you get Flynn, you get ambassadors to Afghanistan, you get, the Afghan czar in the White House, Bush and Obama, left and right. People who work for Trump, people who work for Obama, people who work for Bush, all were interviewed, and we have their statements, off the record, if you will, about the Afghanistan war. And what is the picture that emerges? Because the picture that emerges is very, very clear from these interviews. That from day one, we are being lied to about progress in Afghanistan. That everybody knew that the war was going badly. Everybody knew that the Taliban was not going to be defeated, given the strategy engaged. Everybody knew that they were not going to establish a democratic, civilized, westernized country in Afghanistan. That every attempt that they made failed at almost every junction. And indeed, that American intervention made things worse over and over and over again. That America spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, no. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars. Trying to create an economy in Afghanistan. Trying to suppress opium production in Afghanistan. Trying to reduce corruption in Afghanistan. And they got the exact opposite result at every turn of the corner. They increased corruption. American actions increased corruption. They admit this in the interviews. By throwing money around left and right, millions and millions of dollars, the incentive to be corrupt went through the roof. They engaged in military activities that were clearly failing, and yet they doubled up and continued. Whether it was Bush, whether it was Obama's surge, or whether it's now Trump's surge. And Trump negotiating peace with the Taliban, as if that is possible, as if peace with the Taliban means anything. You want to leave Afghanistan, which I support, leave Afghanistan. But a peace deal with the Taliban is worse than defeat. There is no such thing. It is just another lie told to the American people. At every turn, the Washington Post documents what the general said in public and what the general said in these interviews. What the politicians said in public and what the politicians said in the interviews. And in every single case, it is the exact opposite. In public, they were optimistic. They were going to win. Everything was moving according to plan. Oh, they were training the Afghan military and police, and everything was going to work out fine. And in private, they were saying, oh no, the military police hate America. The military police are untrainable. It will lead only to disaster and destruction. Nothing good is going to come of this struggle. $1 trillion. Today, more civilians in Afghanistan are dying than ever before, and once in a while, every few weeks, tragically, American soldiers are killed in Afghanistan. For what? For whom? To protect the individual rights of Americans? No. No, to continue the charade, the pretense that this war was justified, the pretense that they did not die in vain, the pretense that we did not spend $1 trillion in vain. 2,400 Americans died for nothing. $1 trillion was spent for nothing. 20,000 Americans are crippled for nothing. And the generals and the politicians and the diplomats, they don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to admit it. The documents show that the American government and the American military had no clue what they were getting into in Afghanistan. They didn't understand who the enemy was. They didn't have clear objective goals. They didn't have clear targets. They were constantly confused, constantly receiving contradictory instructions. Was Al-Qaeda the enemy? Was the Taliban the enemy? Was the Afghan people? Was the goal to establish democracy in Afghanistan? Was it to just stabilize it? Was it to win and leave? Nobody knew. And from the beginning, Bush and Rumsfeld promised us, oh, this isn't going to be Vietnam. This is not going to be a quagmire. No. We have clear goals. We know exactly what we are doing. Lie upon lie upon lie. I mean, I said right after 9/11 that unless we identify the enemy, we cannot succeed. The enemy was never identified. I said right after 9/11, Afghanistan cannot be the goal of this war. Afghanistan is a nothing in the middle of nowhere. Yes, Al-Qaeda had bases there. Al-Qaeda had bases there because we let them have bases there, because we refused to bomb them properly, because we refused to make it costly for them to have bases openly, out in the open, in the Afghan territory. So Afghanistan should have never been the target. There was nothing there. Yeah, bomb Al-Qaeda into oblivion. Kill the Taliban leadership who hosted Al-Qaeda to teach the world a lesson that you don't host enemies of the United States on your soil. Fine, and then get the hell out of there. That should have taken 2 weeks. It didn't require a war. Get rid of the leadership of the Taliban and kill as many Al-Qaeda people on the ground as possible and get out. The real war should have been with the ideological, spiritual, and financial supporters of the entire Islamist network and all of the Islamic terrorists. That's not Afghanistan. Nobody cared about Afghanistan. So these reports, I mean, I encourage you to read them. They're truly shocking. And what's shocking about them, to a large extent, is the extent of the lying. It's the extent of the deception and the extent of the incompetence. Americans have this positive view of the military. They have this view of our generals as these competent, able, courageous, honest. No. What comes out of these interviews is how incompetent, scatterbrained, unfocused, and dishonest even our generals are. What General Petraeus says in front of Congress has nothing to do with what General Petraeus actually was thinking at the time. Not to mention the flawed strategy Petraeus and others, Mathis and all of them engaged in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. That did not lead to victory. That did not lead to success. That did not lead to the destruction of the Taliban. Quite the contrary, emboldened them. Do you know, for example, that 1 year we paid farmers in Afghanistan not to grow poppy, not to grow opium? What did the farmers do? They doubled up. They figured the next year we'd pay double. So they started growing more opium. Afghanistan today produces something like 70% of all the opioid in the world. Protected now by the U.S. Nobody cares. So, it's stunning. Stunning. You know, we threw money around creating corruption. By creating that corruption, we delegitimized the one government, the Karzai government, the original government that had maybe a chance of stabilizing Afghanistan. But by creating all the corruption, we delegitimized it. We supported monsters tribal leaders who are clearly monsters without any qualms. Why? Because we thought they were better than the Taliban. But were they? Why did we care about the Taliban? Why were we there? Was the Taliban our enemy? In what context? What were our goals? What were we striving towards? What were we trying to achieve? None of that was answered by the powers to be. Not the Bush administration, not the Obama administration, and now not the Trump administration. We're still in Afghanistan. We still have a surge in Afghanistan. We still believe that things are going to get better in Afghanistan. And now we're negotiating peace with the Taliban that we tried to destroy yesterday. It's truly, truly unbelievable. So, should you trust our government? The answer should be absolutely not. If on an issue of this magnitude, on an issue of this importance, they lie constantly, and of course we know the lies in Vietnam. We thought we'd learned the lessons. No, we've learned nothing. The lies continued in Afghanistan. We can't trust our generals. We can't trust the Pentagon. We can't trust the State Department. We can't trust the president. I mean, the president told us he's bringing troops back home from Syria. And yet, the last story I heard about Syria is we're increasing the number of troops by 3,000 to 5,000. So what is it? Are we leaving Syria? Are we increasing the troops? Are we protecting the oil fields? Are we fighting ISIS? What's our relationship with the Kurds? Do we care? What about Turkey? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Because there's no strategy. There's no thinking. There's no military policy. There's no foreign policy. There's just whatever. You know, if I say I'm anti-war long enough, and by the way, this is not criticism of Trump any more than it was criticism of Obama or Bush. They're all equally pathetic. And again, I do not I do not excuse the generals either. Mathis, Petraeus, all these guys, wimps, who failed. Why we worship them? Why? When they failed. They lost 2 wars. They lost a war in Iraq. They lost a war in Afghanistan. They did nothing to make America safer. And yet, we still trust them. I don't trust any of them. I don't trust the American government or any of its institutions. You know, the courts, maybe, to some extent, still a relative bastion of reason, but only relative. Congress is complete disaster. The White House is a complete disaster, and the military. And I think one of the great horrors of the war on drugs is it's made our law enforcement corrupt. It's corrupted their soul. Spending so much time, so much effort, so much energy, so many lives going after a victimless crime. Going after an inanimate object in a war on drugs, whatever the hell that means, has to corrupt, has to destroy. So do I trust our police? Not completely, no. FBI? No. Intelligence agencies? I mean, the CIA was telling us in the 1980s, 70s, and 80s that the Soviet Union was going as fast as the US. That the Soviet Union had a great economy. That's the CIA. The CIA told us we could win in Afghanistan. The CIA did not stop 9/11. Neither did the FBI, neither did the NSA, who now listens in on us, Americans, rather than actually targeting the terrorists and getting them. No, do I trust my government? I do not. I do not trust any of its agencies. The fact is, the sad fact is that I fear them. Thank God we don't have a draft. Maybe, at least if we had a draft, people would pay attention to the casualties. People would pay attention to a corrupt, disastrous war. I think the fact that we don't have a draft, the elites, and most of us, we don't pay a price other than through our taxes for what's going on in Afghanistan. We don't care about the American volunteers who die there. We don't care about the special forces, the Marines, the soldiers, the pilots who get shot down. They're not our kids. And therefore, stories like this are buried. The Pentagon Papers got a lot of press because a lot of Americans died in Vietnam, and because there was a draft, it was everybody's kids. Now, I'm not for a draft. I'm really, really against the draft. Thank God we don't have a draft. Thank Ayn Rand and thank Milton Friedman that we don't have a draft. So, the rules of engagement in our military in forces in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere, they place the lives of our soldiers as beneath the lives of civilians on the other side. Our soldiers are the least important people in the battlefield. And that, to me, is stunning, stunningly irresponsible, stunningly evil, stunningly anti-American, stunningly anti the individual rights of Americans. That is our government. That is what our government is doing. That's what the best part, supposedly, of our government, the military, is doing. But no, I don't trust our government. I don't trust the military. I don't trust the Pentagon. I don't trust our generals, who are political creatures today. There is no Patton. There is no Sherman. There is no MacArthur in our military ranks today. And if there was, they wouldn't survive. They would never make it to, a significant position. So no, I don't trust our government. And the reason I chose that as the title today is that then you look at the other things that are in the news. So the Democrats today have agreed with the Trump administration. Agreed. They've come together, shaking hands, to approve NAFTA 1.1. Some people want to call it 2.0, but it's not. Now, why are the Democrats suddenly agreeing with Trump to sign a trade deal when they are at the same time impeaching Trump? Why are they willing to compromise, supposedly, and actually shake hands and cut a deal with Trump right now over this trade deal with Mexico and Canada? I mean, what's going on here? It seems very suspicious. And it's obvious what's going on. Trump has basically caved to the Democrats. He needs a win. He needs a trade win. He needs to show that his trade tactics are working. So he has given the Democrats what they want. And what is it that they want? Well, what the Democrats want is true fair trade. What the Democrats want is to impose labor environmental regulations that exist in the United States, labor and environmental standards that exist in the United States on Mexico primarily. Canada already has them, in exchange for the trade deal. NAFTA didn't have that. One of the reasons many Democrats opposed NAFTA. And NAFTA 1.1, the new NAFTA, Trump's new NAFTA, didn't have them either. But now, if the Democrats are agreeing to this, and note, it's not just the Democrats. You know who else is excited about NAFTA 1.1? The unions. Now, I have to tell you that when Democrats and the unions get excited about a trade deal negotiated by anti-trade Donald Trump, it's really, really scary. It's really, really scary. Because they can't be agreeing on anything good for us. They can't be agreeing on anything positive for America. They don't overlap in that way. There's no pro-American position. I don't trust them. And I know exactly what the Democrats got. Indeed, a number of Republicans that are saying, whoa, what happened here? We weren't part of this negotiation. What has the Trump administration given to the Democrats to get the Democrats to support this suddenly out of nowhere in the midst of impeachment? I don't trust this government. I don't trust our government. Or take the news coming out about, I don't know, the FBI investigation of Donald Trump. Well, the Inspector General in the Justice Department came with his conclusions yesterday, immediately criticized by the Attorney General and by Donald Trump. The FBI director commented and said, he was, by the way, the Inspector General said basically, it was a legitimate investigation, it was started in a legitimate fashion, and yes, there was some abuse of power, serious performance failures on the part of the FBI, but nothing like the conspiracy theories the Republicans, the Trump administration has been arguing. Immediately, the FBI director said, yes, we'll take the problems and we'll make adjustments to the FBI, criticized immediately by Donald Trump, not going far enough. Then the Attorney General says he disagrees with the conclusions of the Inspector General. Then another attorney who's looking into how all these investigations of Russian meddling in the elections got started said, oh, he disagrees with a bunch of this stuff. I mean, who do you trust? Who do you believe? Nobody. Nobody. It's all political posturing. I don't trust any of them. I don't know what really happened. I don't care that much in this case, although, you know, it's important, but you just can't keep track of everything. But how do you tell? I mean, within the own Justice Department, people that disagree. And William Barr seems to be a Secretary of Justice who is committed 100% to protect Donald Trump, nothing else. There doesn't seem any interest in the Justice Department in justice or the truth. There seems to be just political posturing, political investigations on both sides. On both sides. So do I trust my government? No. I don't trust them. And let me go back to a point I made earlier. One of the roles of journalism, one of the proper roles of journalism, is to challenge the powers to be. Speak truth to power is a great line. It's to challenge what the government tells us, to challenge what they're saying. And in the Afghan Papers, I think the Washington Post has done a fantastic job at that. How do you make heads or tails of the rest of these stories? But what I find interesting is so many people buy into everything they hear, depending on the news source. It's sad and tragic. Sad and tragic that we live in a world where we cannot trust. We cannot trust. Now, maybe to some extent, this has always been the case, but this is the thing. The bigger government gets, the more ambitious its programs. And this includes, by the way, I forgot the statistics, but it's mind-boggling. We have spent significantly more money in Afghanistan on economic development, not on the military, just economic development. More money in Afghanistan in real dollar terms than we spent on the Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II. But why did the Marshall Plan work? I mean, I still think we shouldn't have spent the money on the Marshall Plan, just to be clear. But why did the Marshall Plan work and this didn't work in Afghanistan? At least there are many reasons, but one reason is we won the Second World War. We won it in decisive fashion. We won it unequivocally. We crushed the enemy. We brought Germany and its allies to their knees. And then we reformed them. It's why our reforms worked in Japan. Japanese are not Europeans. We've got the usual set of racists on my chat who are arguing, oh, that was Europe. They're white people. They're better. No, Japanese are not white people. No, they were crushed. They were defeated. They were on their knees. Then you can make changes. Then you can implement real change. It's not because they were Europeans. It's because they were defeated, and the powers to be, America in those days, was willing to assert itself confidently about what needed to happen. Something we did not do in Afghanistan, we did not do in Iraq. But we shouldn't have done it to begin with. We should have defeated the enemy, crushed them, and come home. Should not be the policemen of the world. All we do is get into trouble when we are. Sorry if I called somebody a racist who isn't a racist, but I'm sensitive because my chats on YouTube tend to be filled with them. So sometimes it's hard to tell. All right, we've got a bunch of super chat questions. I'm going to take them, and feel free to ask more, and we'll see how long this will take. Let's see if there's anything related to what I talked about today. No, not really. There we go. We'll do one on foreign policy. What do you think of Caroline Glick and her foreign policy views of annexing the West Bank as part of Israel? She, of course, is a big Trump supporter. I mean, I've met Caroline Glick. I know Caroline Glick. I've known her for years. I'm not. I've met her once, so it's not that I'm really close to Caroline. But I know her. I've known of her for a long time, and I know a lot of people who know her quite well. I agree with some of what she says. I don't agree with all of what she says. I think she is a real cogent observer of the Middle East and what happens in the Middle East. I think she's wrong about Trump, as I think anybody who supports Trump is wrong about Trump. It doesn't surprise me. She is a nationalist. She is quite religious in the sense that her connection to Israel and the rights of Israel are connected very much to a religious nationalistic perspective, which I do not share. And I've told her so. So I think her views, I'm not surprised she likes Trump. She likes Netanyahu. I hate Netanyahu, although she thought Netanyahu was weak, as did I. And so I think she's right about the one-state solution. I think at the end of the day, the only solution is to have one state. I don't think there's a possible two-state solution. I think it's just too small of a territory, and the cultures are too different. What you have to get is assimilation. What you have to get is a westernization of the Palestinians. What you have to get is the Palestinians' acceptance of a secular, free country. And I think that's possible. I think it would take a long time. I think it would take a lot of work. But it is possible. I don't think that's completely her view. I mean, part of her view is try to get rid of the Palestinians, try to shove them onto Jordan and so on. But I believe in the success of Western ideas, and I think they apply to any people of any culture and race, because I think people can change. I think people can change. So I like Caroline on some of her stuff, and I completely disagree with her on a lot of other things. Completely disagree with her on a lot of other aspects. Wow, I mean, they really do come out on the chat. If you look at Africa, just to respond to one person's comment there, if you look at Africa, somebody says, yeah, if we bring capitalism to Africa, that'll do it, just like it did to the Japanese. Ha, ha, ha. Well, yes, exactly. Absolutely. Fastest growing economy in the world right now is Rwanda, because we brought private property and the rule of law to Rwanda, and indeed, Rwanda is thriving. Botswana, Namibia are countries that have adopted respect for property rights, have adopted respect for the rule of law, and they are thriving economically. So yes, absolutely. If you bring capitalism to Africa, Africa will thrive. And that's exactly the kind of racist, ignorant, stupid comments that the alt-right is full of. And it reflects just plain, straight ignorance, both of factual history, of the reality out there, and just a despicable bias, a racism, a collectivism, a tribalism. Yeah. Look it up. Look it up. What are the fastest growing economies in the world today? Rwanda is thriving. Now, they've got a long way to get to rich, but they're thriving. They're doing very, very well. And one day, the day will come when they could be as rich as any European country. Well, certainly as rich as European country in America, given where we're heading. There's absolutely no reason Africa cannot be as rich, if not richer, than any country in the world if they embrace capitalism. Very simple. All right, not on topic, but not a related topic. Have you seen the film Brazil? If so, what are your thoughts? I saw Brazil a long time ago. I don't know, 30 years ago probably. When it first came out, I think I saw it. I saw it a couple of times. And my thoughts on it are very mixed. On the one hand, it's a kind of dystopian story. There were elements I really liked. It was stylized in a way that I like. I can't remember enough of it. But one of the stunning things about most dystopian stories that I don't like is that they imagine a totalitarian world in which technology, at least to some extent, continues to advance. This is what makes Ayn Rand's Anthem so much better and more interesting than most of the other dystopian novels. Is that Ayn Rand actually projects what the world looks like when it becomes purely collectivistic, and when the world becomes completely authoritarian. There is no technology. Technology dies. Progress dies. So, again, I enjoyed Brazil, but I can't remember enough about it to really give you an analysis or to tell you that I was objective about it back then. Hey, Yaron, any thoughts on the recent debate on banning porn? Is it protected speech under the First Amendment? Could it be worthwhile banning it? No! How can it be worthwhile banning it? It's a human activity that has no victim. Why is it anybody's business? Why does anybody care? You don't want porn, don't watch it. You don't want your kids to watch porn, put some kind of screen on your home computer that doesn't allow them to reach pornography. You want to shield them from porn completely in the culture, move to Montana. Rural Montana with no internet at all. How can it be right to ban porn? How can it be right for the government to start deciding what is acceptable morally and what is unacceptable morally? But that's exactly what, Ben Shapiro and his religionist friends want the government to do. They want to institute their morality over us. They want to tell us what we can and cannot watch, what we can and cannot see, what we can and cannot say in the end. I mean, banning porn is violating individual rights. You have a right to engage in pornography, to view pornography, to do pornography. It might be immoral. It might be wrong. It might be even harmful to you watching it or engaging in it or directing it or producing it or acting in it. But so what? Why is it any of your business? Why is it any of the government's business? The government's job is to protect individual rights. Period. What does that mean? The government's job is to protect our freedom. Indeed, the government's job is to protect the freedom of the porn industry to engage in porn free of coercion, free of people shutting it down. So no, I think the idea of banning porn is horrific. As if that would stop pornography. Just like, by the way, banning drugs has stopped drug use globally. The war on drugs. Another successful war that involves no lies at all. So, no, I don't think it's worth banning it. I think it would be a travesty. I think it would be disgusting. I think it would be immoral. I think it would be anti-everything this country stands for. It would be the equivalent of prohibition on alcohol, the equivalent of the drug war. All things, I think, are horrific. It's not the government's job. Again, somebody mentions prostitution. I'm not against prostitution. That should be legal too. It's none of the government's job to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body. If she wants to sell it, why is it anybody's business? I mean, we have to live with a government that implements a Puritan morality on us? By what moral right? By what moral right? Altruism. Altruism, it means that I care about my neighbor, that I need to coerce my neighbor into behaving in positive ways, in good ways. We can't trust people. You can't trust people. You have to force them to be good. And that's the mentality of prohibition. That's the mentality of a drug war. And that's the mentality and a prohibition of prostitution and now on porn. So no, I'm a huge supporter of the porn industry. And by the way, I'm a huge supporter of Hustler magazine actually fighting in the for their First Amendment right, because absolutely they have a First Amendment right to publish pictures of nude women, to publish videos of sexual acts. I might think it's despicable. I might think it's horrible, but they absolutely have a right to do it. Ayn Rand wrote an essay about this, about censorship. This is censorship. This is the beginning of the end of free speech. You absolutely have a right to free speech when it comes to pornography. By the way, Ayn Rand has an article about this. The Voice of Reason, or maybe it's in the Voice of Reason. Somebody says, notice that AI campus courses are getting moved to Vimeo. Does that have anything to do with YouTube's new terms of service? I doubt it. I don't know why AI campus courses are being moved to Vimeo. Nobody involves me in those kind of decisions. I'm not involved in the day-to-day decision-making at the Institute, so I have no idea. Chomsky called Corbyn anti-Semitism pure propaganda. Well, Chomsky is one to know. Recently on a show, you called Chomsky an anarchist and Marxist. What is his overall philosophy? Well, his fundamental philosophy, he is fundamentally a nihilist. But yeah, the form of government he believes in is a form of anarchism. It's called the socialist anarchist form of government. He believes in no government at all, and basically the workers organizing to create little utopias where everything is owned by the group and everything is voted on, and I can forget, syndicationalist, something like that it's called. And he's definitely a Marxist, and much of what he argues is straight out of Marx or is the application of Marx. He is an apologist for the worst horrors of communism. For many, many years, he was an apologist for Pol Pot and the horrific actions of Pol Pot in Cambodia. He is one of the most evil intellectuals in the world today, and a despicable human being that has no respect for facts, a constant fount of conspiracy theories. He reminds me a lot of the people in the alt-right. The alt-left and the alt-right are very similar. They're filled with conspiracy theories. They hate capitalism. Today, I don't think Chomsky is this, but today many of them are racist, both on the left and on the right. Anarcho-syndicalism, yes, that's his political philosophy, political ideology. That anarchism is horrific. whether from the left or from the right. So he is very much a nihilist. He hates America. He hates Israel, but primarily he hates America. It's everything to do with America. And he like, again, the kind of the alt-right, he creates multiple level of conspiracies to blame America for everything. You know, there's a lot of sympathy among libertarians, among certain types of libertarians, for Chomsky, because he's an anarchist like them, and he hates America like them. I talked about this with Ron Paul. There's a lot of similarities between Ron Paul and Chomsky in their anarchist, in their views of conspiracies, and particularly their views of America and America's role in the world. Right. Have you watched Hillsdale College Larry On's Intro to Aristotle's Ethics lecture and student discussion? How would you compare his presentation of Aristotle's view of the good to Rand's? I have not watched the talk. I'll look for it, so I might watch it and give you commentary afterwards. I mean, Larry Ons and the Hillsdale College are quite religious. I'd have to watch it. I don't want to impute a certain view on him of Aristotle that I don't know if he has or not. But Aristotle at the end was not Ayn Rand. That is, Aristotle's view of the good and Aristotle's view of is not the same as Ayn Rand's, and his approach to ethics is not the same as Ayn Rand. They don't start at the same point, and they don't reach the same conclusions. The thing that unites the two is their focus on the individual and the individual's flourishing, the individual's success as a human being in achieving the good for the individual rather than the good for the group, the community, God, or something external of the individual. So that is what is the same. It's basically they're both egoistic philosophers. They both believe in egoism as the proper moral code. But beyond that, there are many, many, many differences, and I'm no expert to articulate who could articulate those differences. That's a good question for somebody like Greg Salamieri, who is more of an Aristotle scholar. And I'm sure Ons has like a religious spin that tries to maybe, I don't know, interpret Aristotle in a more intrinsicist way that would be consistent with religion. But again, I'd have to listen to talk. I might listen to the talk. Did you read Jason Hill's brilliant open letter to Greta Thunberg challenging her morality? You have to do a show on this. Do you know anything about him? Yeah, I've known Jason Hill for a long time. He wrote an excellent article years and years ago about how Ayn Rand saved his life and about growing up in Jamaica, both an atheist and gay, which was horrific, and discovering Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand, he literally either tried to commit suicide or contemplated committed suicide, and she basically gave him purpose in life and showed him there was a way and gave him the kind of a moral backbone. So I saw that article, which I thought was very interesting and very good. I've met Jason Hill several times since then. I interviewed him on the show. So if you're interested in Jason, you can search Yaron Brook show Jason Hill, and the show will come up. So the fact that you missed it live doesn't mean you can't listen to it or watch it. It's available on YouTube right now. Jason is basically a good guy. I don't agree with everything he says. I liked his letter to Greta, although I found it a little too dismissing of an entire generation in ways that I think were overgeneralized. But I think basically his critique of Greta is correct and right. And Jason is a very good writer. He is a strong writer. He doesn't hold back any punches. He really goes for it. And I really respect that. So I like Jason, and I think he's a good guy. Greg, I didn't notice this, but Greg said a couple of things about Aristotle. He says there are more parallels between Rand and Aristotle. For both, life is an activity. That is, life is not passive. Life is not just there. You have to do something to be alive. You have to, so survival necessitates action. And the fundamental action that human life requires for both, and this is huge, and this is a huge similarity, in spite of certain differences, this makes them allies, huge allies, is that the fundamental activity is thinking. It's being rational. It's using one's reason. It's, accepting reality, accepting facts, engaging your mind, and using your mind to learn about reality. And, that unites them and makes them, the two advocates of individualism, the two advocates of reason, ultimately, and of egoism in the history of philosophy. There might have been others, but these are the two giants. All right. Years ago, an objectivist advised sharing objectivist ideas using letters to the editor. With the decline of newspapers, what would you recommend? I mean, I think that the way to do it today is through social media. I think social media is a very powerful tool. I think instead of writing a letter to the editor, you can write a comment on Twitter or on Facebook. You can put up an article and comment on it on top on Facebook. Facebook is much more agreeable to these kind of things because you can write longer text. I think social media is a brilliant way in which to get our ideas out there, to be controversial, to be radical for capitalism and for individualism, radical for reason and rationality. And I think the way to express those views, rather than letters to the editor, which I think are dead, basically, except for maybe the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, I think is you probably get more views now on Facebook. And even on Twitter, you can do a stream of comments that can actually generate real discussion and real interest. And sometimes you can get a lot of shares, and you can actually affect a lot of people. I always suggest to people, there is a ton of Ayn Rand content online. At Ayn Rand Campus, ARI Campus has a lot of Ayn Rand's articles online. And there's a lot of ARI produced content online. Use that. Link to it. Do a little commentary and link to an article. There's nothing more powerful than that. If you can get more people to read Ayn Rand's nonfiction this way, or Onkar Ghatel's essay, or Ilan Journo, or Steve Simpson, or any of the intellectuals at the Institute, if you can get objectivist writings that are already online, that are already available, that they're there, anybody can view them at a zero marginal cost. All it needs is the link to it. And to me, one of the things the objectivist movement doesn't do is share. You don't share enough. Yeah, maybe because I give these talks about sharing and socialism. But you got to use that share button, the like button, the retweet button. And you've got to do it with content that is the best. And the best content is Ayn Rand. And it's all available online. The best content is Leonard Peikoff. It's all available online. Share it. Comment on it. Tweet it. And I mean, this is a massive tool we have, and we're not using it. We're not using it. And other movements do this. They take their leading intellectuals, and they just pound away with their content to all over the place, to everywhere they go. They use social media effectively to get the content of their leading intellectuals out. And not everybody needs to be a leading intellectual. Nobody is an Ayn Rand. So if you can find a good Ayn Rand essay, for example, there was discussion about what is racism. Well, the essay on racism by Ayn Rand is on the Ayn Rand Institute's website. Take that essay, write commentary on it, put it up on Facebook, tweet it out on Twitter. I mean, the power of that would be enormous. I mean, I think it's one of the failings of the movement that we don't do enough of that we don't use the tool that we have to really get the ideas out there into the hands of more and more and more people. And I think the internet is this amazing tool that we should embrace more than anybody else. to get our ideas out there. And, too many objectivists are afraid to be too radical, controversial on social media, it's just for family or whatever. Or they want to be original, so they want to write their own essay. So why link to an Ayn Rand essay when you can write your own essay? Because she's better than you. Get this stuff out there. Even my show's not as good as Ayn Rand, but there's not a lot of sharing going on. But if you want to change the world, then you can't be a coward. You can't pretend you don't believe in these ideas. You have to stand up, and if you like a show, share it. Get your friends to listen, even if they hate it. And you never know where to land up, because sharing kind of goes in all kinds of directions. All right, let's see. What do great entrepreneurs and journalists have in common? Government, too, is a collective term made of individuals. You take on these individuals. You'll take on these individuals. What do great entrepreneurs and journalists have in common? I think an independent mind, a thinking, a curiosity. I think they're very different. So they all have, the key thing that good people have in common is honesty meaning respect for the facts. Great journalists have an enormous respect for the facts and the truth. And to some extent that's true of entrepreneurs, but they have other things. In addition to that, it takes a certain genius, a certain ability to be an entrepreneur. Government, very few people who are honest and are committed to the facts join the government. Government jobs are lazy jobs for the most part. Most government employees are people who go to get a job there because it's easy, because they lack ambition. I think many of them lack honesty, the honesty that's required to identify the fact that your job is useless, that you're being destructive, that you're not creating, that you're not building, that you're not making, that you're actually detrimental to the world. That kind of dishonesty. I think many bureaucrats, many people who work for the government have that. I do not have a lot of respect for people who work for the government. And I think, unfortunately, that is more and more true over time with people in the military. I think as the military has become more corrupt, as the military is being asked to do things the military should not have to do, like build democracies and police the world, the military has become more and more corrupt, less and less engaged with what it should be, which is there to defend us and to do whatever is necessary for that defense. I think the military has become corrupt. And I think people who make the military a career are often corrupt. I haven't seen on television or anywhere else a general that I respect. The fact that somebody is uniformed does not cause me to respect. And I started off the show with an illustration of why. The lies that they have engaged in with regard to Afghanistan that's gone on and on and on. So what would it take for somebody to work for the government to be a good person? Again, a clear respect for the truth. First of all, they'd have to only be in government in a position that would exist in a true free market, or engaged in activities that moved us towards more freedom and more respect for individual rights. People in government who are there to sustain the status quo, that is evil. Because the status quo is evil. The status quo is anti-individual rights, anti-you as an individual, anti-your life. It's oppressive to your freedom. They shouldn't be doing it, and I don't respect them. Do you agree with Milton Friedman that you can have Social Security or open borders, but never both? I think it was welfare or open borders, but never both. Given that, are you opposed to open borders in the U.S. under the current paradigm? No, I don't actually agree with Milton Friedman for a variety of reasons, and I think these are false kind of questions. We're not going to have open borders tomorrow. Nobody in government actually would engage in open border policies tomorrow. The Democrats are generally anti-immigration because unions are anti-immigration, and Republicans, we know, are anti-immigration. So the option of open borders is not an option for tomorrow. I've never advocated for tomorrow we open the borders. I've advocated for that is the ideal. That's what we should strive towards. And I've offered programs to get us there, interim programs that take into account that we live in a welfare state and all of that. For example, anybody who can get a job in the United States is admitted with a 5-year visa, renewable as long as they have a job. Bring in as many immigrants as possible, but don't give them citizenship, but don't give them welfare. There are all kinds of solutions to the welfare programs. You can have open borders, but no welfare, for example. Zero welfare to new immigrants for a whole generation. So, it's a bogus claim to say that I am for open borders and welfare. I believe we should do away with the welfare state in stages. Even the welfare state, I don't believe you should do away tomorrow. And I believe we should have an open border policy in stages. But let me just say, for the record, all the economic data I have seen and all the economic fact that I know suggests that immigrants pay more into the system than they consume. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. I resent Americans who go on welfare far more than I resent immigrants who go on welfare. Americans who've had every opportunity, who've grown up in the best country in the world with the greatest opportunities in the world. They go on welfare? That's pretty disgusting. Now, granted, the way we treat some poor people and the way our government treats them with government schools and all of that, it's not surprising they go on welfare. But an immigrant who comes here is ambitious and for a period goes on welfare, I resent that a lot less. The resentment of immigrants on welfare has to do with the fact that they're not Americans. Has a lot to do still with the xenophobic nature of this country. What is bankrupting Social Security, what is bankrupting Medicare, what is bankrupting the welfare state has nothing, zero, nada to do with immigration. It is Americans bankrupting those systems. So if you hate welfare, if you hate Social Security, if you hate Medicare, then I want to see you talk about that. Forget immigration. Talk about welfare. Talk about doing away with it. But until you do that, I don't want to hear your views on immigration. Because you're just using welfare as an excuse. As an excuse to ban immigrants. That's what you really want, is to ban immigration, and using welfare as an excuse to do that. So I don't think we should have open borders tomorrow. I think you have to phase it in. Just like I don't believe you should do away with welfare tomorrow. You have to phase it out. I think all this phasing in and phasing out, you have to articulate an ideal. An ideal society is one with open borders and no welfare. Now, open borders to me means screening at the border. We can talk about what screening and so on. But, so I think Milton Friedman was wrong on the economics and was wrong in terms of the solution. Again, you could have a simple solution. You could have open immigration and ban welfare from immigrants if that was your concern. But nobody's even talking about that. Yeah, I know. You guys really, what really concerns you is you hate immigrants. It's not an issue of open immigration. You don't want any immigration. You don't want anybody, particularly you don't want anybody who doesn't look like you. Now, I'm not saying that's what you, the questioner, said, but that's what some of the people in the chat clearly suggest. So I disagree with Milton Friedman about the economics. He was wrong. And I think just like everything else, you need interim plans for the phasing out of statist policies. Anti-immigration is a statist policies. Building walls is statist policies. Having robust immigration laws are statist policies. I want to eliminate statist policies through and through. And by the way, if you have a question, you can ask it using the Super Chat. Don't be cheap. Other people are using the Super Chat. If you want to know more about my views on immigration, you can ask in the Super Chat. All right, is it really only in the in context of or by reference to some problem that music and architecture can be ugly or beautiful in an objectivist view. Wow, I'm not sure I understand. So music is difficult to explain. I think music can be self-evidently ugly because music can be painful, and I think that would be ugly. So I don't usually use the term ugly to describe music. So there's certain music that just is painful. You can't listen to it. It's so atonal. It's so grinding. It's so awful. It's noise. Sometimes I go to a lot of classical music concerts, and often they stick a modern piece in the middle, and I sit through it, and it's noise. It's not music. So that's the standard by which I would say architecture is different, because architecture has a problem. Architecture is trying to solve something. Architecture is it's got a use. So you can't divorce the aesthetic from the use. I mean, this is the great Frank Lloyd Wright, form follows function. So unless you know the function, you can't evaluate the form completely. All right. Okay, so here's one on immigration, so I'll take this one, even though it's out of turn. Okay, that'll be the last question because we are running out of time. Educate us on the Muslim ban. What Muslim ban? There is no Muslim ban. The Muslim ban that Trump put in place is stupid. I've said this many times. I said it when he put it in place. I've said it yesterday when I talked about my show. You don't ban Muslims from the countries where there are no terrorists, and you allow Muslims to come in from countries that have terrorists. Now, I don't believe Muslims are a problem from an immigration perspective. I think Muslims are problems where they live because they inject the terrorism. 9/11 was not done by immigrants. So my view is you got to win the war. My view is that you got to go to where they live and crush them and destroy them. I think while you're doing that, which shouldn't take that long, but while you're doing that, that's okay to ban immigration from those countries you're at war with, or even people who sympathize with the countries you're at war with. So we had an effective Nazi immigration ban or a German immigration ban during World War II. We certainly had an immigration ban on Japanese during World War II. So while you're at war, what you need to do, the sequence is this: declare war, and part of that declaration of war is a Muslim ban, and then destroy the enemy, and when you declare victory, you eliminate the Muslim ban. That's the way I would do it. That's the ideal. And I think anything short of the ideal is a cop-out and can involve, violation of rights. Now, given that we're not going to go to war, should we have a Muslim ban? If you could do it in a smart way, I would do what I call intensive screenings. I would use the Israeli methodology of screening people and keeping out anybody who is even semi-radical. And I don't think it's that hard, and I think it's doable. And I think if you train people right, you can figure that out. I mean, to see a dramatic reduction from Muslims is not a bad thing in the current world in which we live. But again, I said what I think the right solution is. I think anything else is far less than optimal. Far, far less than optimal, and not anything that Trump or anybody else. I mean, Trump's Muslim ban was showmanship. It was pathetic. I mean, if you're really going to ban Muslims, then ban Muslims. But we allow them for Saudi Arabia. Not only do we allow them for Saudi Arabia, we train the Saudi military forces in our military bases. And then when one of them goes radical, they shoot a bunch of our people. So somebody says, wouldn't that kind of screening qualify as an ideological test? We're at war. And at war, you have an ideological test, absolutely. But again, this is why the only way to do this properly is to declare war. And as long as we don't declare war, you can't do it right. He can do it right. Now, this is the problem with half-assed solutions. The solution to immigration is do away with welfare and do away with immigration controls. That might take 10 years, but that's the goal. Has to be clear. The goal for the Islamic threat that we face is war. It's to declare war and to do it properly. We're at war, but as long as you don't declare war, then it's a joke. The whole thing's a joke. Does it ever blow your mind that Ayn Rand was a real person? Yeah, I mean, no, what blows my mind is not that she was a real person. I can see that. And I know people who knew Ayn Rand, so I have a certain sense of her through them. I wish I'd met her myself. But what blows my mind is how brilliant she was. What blows my mind is when I read essays she wrote 40 years ago and how spot on they are. How spot on they are right now. That to me is stunning. And the genius of her, that is what is truly amazing to me. Why would one fundamentally care about the continuation of one's life as opposed to just the continued existence of one's consciousness? Saying, let that imply life to the extent necessary. Because that's a mind-body dichotomy. I mean, your life is your consciousness. You can't separate the two. There is no consciousness without life. And there is no, consciousness means nothing without life. So what you want is everything that's involved with your body and your mind, not the two as separate things that's what Christianity does. It separates the two things. That's why they want to ban porn. That's why they think anything material is despicable and horrible and we should ban it. They'd love to ban sex, at least sex that wasn't for procreation, if they could. So, no, I mean, what would consciousness be without pleasure? I mean, and pleasure's material, pleasure's life, pleasure's the body. So Ayn Rand and I believe very much in a mind-body integration. You can't have soul without a body. It's meaningless. And it's pointless. It's meaningless and pointless. How about that? I mean, I know the deeper philosophical reasons for this, which I'm not getting at, but this is a quick Q&A. So no, I think what you care about is your continued existence as a material and spiritual conscious being. Not just one or the other. Partially because there's zero evidence that they can exist separately. They can't. They're the same. They're one and the same. They're one is a consequence of the other. And again, there's no meaning to a consciousness without a body. Why are humans the only species to develop reason? I don't know. Because it's hard. Because, you probably don't get many tracks to do it. It's unusual. Why are giraffes the only species with a really long neck? I guess some dinosaurs had that. Lions have their unique qualities. Every one of the dominant species have something that makes them unique. So why are humans the only species to develop reason? Because they are. And we don't know. There might be other species in different planets that have reasons that we haven't encountered yet. So, but it's really hard. Any particular evolutionary route is really, really hard to get to. And human beings are particularly hard because it's a particularly phenomena of complexity. And it's just not going to happen. It's unlikely to happen in many paths. It's likely to happen only in one. All right, what do you mean intellectuals won't allow pure capitalism? There are more free market intellectuals today than any time in human history. That's true, but it's still a tiny number. So there are more intellectuals, more free market intellectuals today than at any time in human history. There are very few of them, unfortunately. And at the same time, they're not as good as I would like them to be. That is, they're not philosophical enough. They don't completely understand the case for free markets, which makes them, I think, relatively weak in terms of their defense of freedom, but in defense of capitalism. But The fact is that the intellectual world is still dominantly anti-capitalism and won't consider capitalism. And if you're a capitalist intellectual out there, it's really hard to get a job. There are more of them than ever, still hard to get a job. All right. That, we're going to call it a night, an hour and 20 minutes. That's good. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Those of you who get value out of the show, even those of you who get a value by hating the show, you're encouraged to support the show so we can keep doing this, so you can keep having these bouts of inspiration, entertainment, and for some of you, fury and hatred. You can do so at yaronbrookshow.com/support or at subscribestar.com/yaronbrookshow. I hope you're enjoying December. I love December because I love the holiday season, the holiday spirit. Time for reflection, time for just a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to Christmas. I will be back on Saturday, maybe before, but certainly on Saturday. I think I've got an interview. I'm doing an interview on Saturday. And then Saturday and Sunday. So I'll see you all then. And love you guys. And we will, share, right? We talked about this. We talked about this today. Share. If you like a show, share it. I think the show yesterday was particularly good on Tucker Carlson. Particularly good on defending capitalism against the ignorance and evil of conservatives/socialists like Tucker Carlson. All right, guys. Talk to you soon.